Well, today we are looking at part 2 of our series on the LGBTQ plus movements that we are calling SOGI, as we make some sexual observations from God's instructions, from God's word, right, from the Bible. This is a little bit of a play on terms. For those of you who don't know, within the BC school curriculum, all things LGBTQ is taught under the umbrella term of SOGI as well, where it stands for sexual orientation and gender identity. And so last week we started this series by taking a look at sexual orientation. And in that message, we saw that God is the one who designed and gave us the gift of sex to be enjoyed within heterosexual monogamous marriage. We also saw that when we use and abuse sex outside of the boundaries that God has given to us, it can actually lead to a lot of pain and devastation in our lives and in the lives of others. And finally, we saw how sexual orientation really matters because marriage and sex were given to us to be a tangible picture and a living illustration of the close relationship that each and every one of us can have with Jesus. And so, friends, if you missed part 1, you can catch that up through our website. But the point, ultimately, is that sexual orientation really does matter. In fact, it matters so much that we're going to go a little bit deeper on this subject, especially on that last point about the relationship that we can have with Jesus by focusing and looking at the orientation of our hearts. However, first, I want to remind us of the 3 important truths that we need to remember if we want to discuss these challenging topics in a loving and gracious way. And so first, we need to remember that all people are valuable and should be loved. Friends, everyone is valuable to God because He has made each and every one of us in His image. And Jesus taught us to love everyone, no matter their lifestyle, their orientation, their gender identity, or the choices that people make. We are called to love and to value everyone. Second, we should remember that being loving is more important than being right. Being loving is more important than being right. And this point deals with how we should discuss controversial discussions and topics like this one, because if we fail to consider the needs of others in the way that we talk to them, or about issues that they care deeply about, that matter to people, then even if we're right, we'll still lose because we'll have lost our relationship with them if we're not careful. We need to remember, right, that Jesus is the one who changes people. He's the one who changes hearts and minds and lives. And so we can have these difficult discussions, but we need to do so gracefully with love and respect for all people. And finally, we need to remember that love does not require agreement. Right? Loving others does not require that we accept everyone's viewpoint or what they do. You see, part of Jesus loving us was showing us that our actions have very real consequences. So real that He had to die for us. Right? He had to lay down His life for each and every one of us. And friends, we know that not only did Jesus die for us to set us free from our sin, but He also wants us to live a life apart from sin, living our lives His way, not in our old patterns of life. Right? That's why when Jesus encountered people in sin, right, caught in sin, He would love and accept them just as they were, but He would also challenge them to not live that way any longer. For example, in John chapter 8, when the religious leaders brought a woman who was caught in adultery to Jesus in order to try and trap Him, right, Jesus said, "Let any one of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her." You see, back then, committing adultery was punishable by death. And so the religious leaders were trying to trap Jesus where if Jesus said, no, you're right, she should be put to death, he would actually lose a lot of popularity and influence with the common people who are struggling just to survive and make ends meet. And so they preferred, hey, we need to have some grace here, right? But if he said, no, just let her off the hook, then Jesus would have been going against the Old Testament law. And so they could accuse him of breaking God's law. And so it was, in a way, a brilliant trap. But when Jesus said, okay, well then let any of you who is without sin be the first to throw a stone at her, right? Jesus recognized that every person is sinful. All of us sin. We all make mistakes. We all disobey God. We all, in some ways, live in rebellion to God. And so after Jesus said this and they all left because none of them were sinful or sinless, right? Jesus, who was the only sinless one and the only one who actually had a right to judge and condemn her, said to her, well, neither do I condemn you. But then he also said, go now and leave your life of sin. And so as we continue to explore these highly emotional topics, let's remember to love and value everyone. Let's respect everyone in the way that we talk about these topics, even when we don't think other people are listening to us. And let's look to Jesus for the truth, because only Jesus will steer us in the right direction and in the way in which we should go. And so with that said, let's go deeper into this topic of orientation. Now, friends, when you hear that word orientation, what comes into your mind? Right? Not just in the area of sexual orientation, which we looked at that more in detail last week, but just plain old orientation. When you hear that word, what are some of the pictures or the things that you think about? Before we jump in and talk about this, take a few minutes and share your thoughts with those sitting around you, and then we'll come back together and keep going with the message. All right. Hopefully you had a little bit of a good discussion about this idea of orientation. The dictionary actually defines orientation as the act or process. I'm not on. There we go. As the act or process of orienting or the state of being oriented, which isn't very helpful, is it? It's like kind of using the root word in the definition. It's like that's not very helpful. But maybe what might be a little bit more helpful is looking at some examples. I heard some of you talking and sharing and some of the ideas that came up at our table, where orientation, for example, can be an introduction to something new, to help somebody adjust to new surroundings, such as at the beginning of a new school year. right? When people are going to a new school year, especially at colleges, right? New students are often given tours of the campus and the school building so that they can know where their classes are, where they can access resources, and they're usually taught what are the rules of the school so that they can follow the school guidelines. Orientation could also refer to the process of navigating a new situation internally, such as getting a promotion at work and trying to figure out what do your relationships with your coworkers now look like now that you've been promoted to a different position. Orientation can also refer to somebody's position, for example, in reference to due north, right? The points on a compass, or to a specific place or object, such as when you need to stop and get your bearings and figure out where you are so that you can figure out, where you want to go and how to get there. I mean, ultimately, orientation is really about directions. It's about finding your way. And that's true whether it's talking about, orientation physically or emotionally, mentally, or otherwise, right? Just like how sexual orientation is the direction of someone's attraction, as well as how they choose to act on that attraction. But friends, what would happen if you had a compass where the needle of that compass was bent or curved? It wouldn't be a very useful compass, would it? I mean, if you had some kind of a bent needle or curve to it, you'd be wondering, well, is the base part of it pointing in the right direction towards north, or is it somewhere in that curve, or is it at the end of the arrow? Like, which way is north? Or what if you started to forget where things were, right? If you maybe got an injury that threw off your sense of direction, it'd be really hard to find your way around. That's why a lot of people with Alzheimer's or dementia often get lost in areas that they've known for a long time. Or what about those times when you feel a certain way based on your emotions, but you know that your heart and your emotions are actually leading you in a harmful direction? You see, friends, one of the hardest questions asked around this discussion of sexual orientation is about monogamous homosexual relationships, right? Same-sex marriages where a man is married to a man or a woman is married to a woman, but they're monogamous. They're not sleeping around with other people. They're not engaging in any other relationships. They are, in a sense, committed to one another. I mean, why can't a monogamous homosexual relationship illustrate our relationship with Jesus just as a heterosexual marriage does? After all, the only difference is that homosexual partners can't have children in the usual way, but there are many heterosexual couples who aren't able to get pregnant either and have to resort to things like in vitro fertilization or artificial insemination. Yeah, and I guess taking that a little bit further, there's many who argue that it's not fair that people with same-sex attraction can't fulfill those inner desires, those inner attractions that they have. At least that's the argument. But friends, the problem with this kind of thinking is that it actually doesn't take sin into account. You see, sin has messed up our compass, so to speak, right? It's skewed the orientation of our lives, not just our sexual orientation, but the orientation of everything in our lives, everything we think about, everything we do. I mean, physically, sin has affected all of us, right? We all have issues, whether it's lifelong problems from the moment we're conceived or born, like those children who have spent more time in the children's hospital rather than outside of the hospital, or whether it's things like untreatable diseases that rear their ugly heads at different times in our lives. Many of you know that about 10 years ago, I was diagnosed with rheumatoid arthritis. I live in pain each and every day, whether it's a lot or a little, depends on my meds, but it's a struggle, it's a challenge, right? Even the regular colds and flus and all of the illnesses that kind of go through our community seasonally, all of these things are because of sin. Right? Because of sin, there's death in this world, and our bodies, as much as we try and fight it, are slowly dying. Sin also affects our minds. We're always battling a battle within our thoughts, whether it's mental illness like depression or anxiety, a battle with how we think about ourselves and others and whether or not we truly value one another, or even the struggle of dealing with all of the ideas that bombard us each and every day. Jordan Peterson, who's a clinical psychologist and a professor emeritus at the University of Toronto, said on his podcast that ideas are foisted upon us all the time by what others say and do, by what we see online and in the media, and by what we experience. But it's only when we start to wrestle with those ideas that we are beginning to actively think. You see, Peterson recognizes the battle of the mind that we face in not blindly accepting every idea that comes our way, and that's because there are such things as bad ideas, right? There are such things as bad thoughts, once again, thanks to sin. And of course, there's also our hearts, right? Our feelings often lead us astray, such as when we overreact and hurt those we love because of something that happened in another area of our lives. Such as when, maybe things don't work out the way we had hoped at work, and so we come home and what do? We take it out on our families, right? Or when young ladies often flirt with and want to be with the bad boys instead of the gentlemen, even though they know that in the long run it's probably not going to work out very well. Friends, this can also include unhealthy sexual attraction, whether it's an addiction to pornography, a desire for sex with someone who's married or someone you're not married to, as well as same-sex attraction. Right? Sin has also messed up our hearts and our emotions. St. Augustine, who was a Christian theologian and philosopher and a leader in the church in North Africa during the late 300s and early 400s AD, used the Latin phrase incurvatus in se to describe sin. Translated into English, it means to be curved inward on oneself, right? Kind of like having a compass that no matter where you're standing, whatever direction you're facing, the arrow is always curved back at you. You see, friends, God created humanity in His image and to have a relationship with Him. Right? We were originally made with a heart and a life orientation towards God, with the arrow of our life compass pointing at Him. But sin twisted that compass arrow inward. Martin Luther, the leader or figurehead of the Protestant Reformation, when the Protestant church split from the Roman Catholic Church back in the 1500s, used this phrase incurvatus in se when he wrote about the Apostle Paul's struggle with sin that he wrote about in Romans chapter 7. Paul wrote, "I do not understand what I do. For what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate, I do. I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. For I do not do the good I want to do, but the evil I do not want to do, this I keep on doing." Right? That's the battle. That's the struggle. Right? Luther wrote about how Paul struggled this way because of sin. Sin had affected every aspect of Paul's life, curving his thoughts, his emotions, and his will inward towards himself, such that even when he had a desire to do good, he couldn't carry it out. And so sin had twisted the orientation of Paul's entire life from what God had intended for him. And it's that same way for each and every one of us as well. Friends, sin has affected us. Sin has damaged us to the very depths of our souls, to the core of our beings. And that sin affects everything including our sexual orientation, but includes everything, because what we do and what we say flows out of who we are and what's going on the inside of us, in our thoughts, our emotions, and in the choices that we make. It's in the depths of our being where the battle against sin rages. But this is also where the battle over sin can be won, by changing what we love most and where we put our greatest affections. We see this most clearly when Jesus was asked, which is the greatest command, right? From the entire Old Testament law that God gave, which is the greatest command? And Jesus replied in Matthew 22:37, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. Friends, Jesus was quoting from the Old Testament law, the book of Deuteronomy, which is the 5th book of the Bible, what is considered the last book of the Old Testament law. In Deuteronomy 6, verse 5, God commanded, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. Now, it's interesting that while it sounds like Jesus quoted directly from Deuteronomy 6, verse 5, and he did, but there was a little bit of a change there. You might have heard it, right? Matthew recorded Jesus as saying to love God with all of our heart, soul, and mind, whereas the original in Deuteronomy says to love God with heart, soul, and strength. In fact, if we look at what Mark's account of the same incident that he got from the Apostle Peter's recollection, he wrote that Jesus said, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all of your strength. And just so that he's not left out, Luke was also a little bit different. When somebody asked Jesus what he must do to get eternal life, Jesus asked the man to summarize the law, and the man answered Jesus saying, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all of your strength, and with all of your mind, which Jesus agreed with, even though the order was somewhat different than Mark's version. Now, although they're slightly different and unique, although each recollection is slightly off from each other, they're all actually saying the same thing, just in different ways. You see, Deuteronomy was written to the Israelites in a specific time and a specific culture, as were the accounts of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And they wrote in such a way to communicate the timeless truth and the importance of this command to love God based on the culture and for whom it was written. You see, in the Old Testament Hebrew culture, people were seen as having three aspects to their being, right? People were made up of three parts, is how they believed. It was believed that people had a soul or a spirit, that image of God that is imprinted on each person, giving them value, and that will last even after people die. Right? There's also the inner workings of each person, which included their thoughts, their emotions, and their choices. And finally, there's the physical body through which they lived out those choices in what they said and in how they acted. Now, the core of a person, out of which everything flowed, was often associated back then with the center of a person. And so even though our English Bibles say and start in Deuteronomy 6:5 that people should love the Lord your God with all your heart, it would actually be more realistic to understand that as love the Lord your God with all of your kidneys. Or with all of your guts, with all of your stomach and your intestines. Right? Again, back then it was believed that what flowed out of a person came from the center of who they were, right? Right down in this area. Of course, nowadays we think of that as heart. But when God gave the command to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength, God started with the core of every person. Right? He started with the depths of who you are, which included all aspects of the mind and the will, as well as all of our emotions. We're to love God with everything inside of us. But he didn't stop there, right? Then God moved on to loving him with all of our soul, Another word for soul is living being, referring to how we should love God with all of the parts of our lives. Right? As we live out our ordinary day-to-day lives and all of the habits and rituals and patterns that we go through, we're to love God in all of those aspects. And then finally, God said that we're to love him with all of our strength, right? In those times where we exert all of our strength, all of our energy, right? Those times when we're not just living our day-to-day ordinary lives, but we're going through, extraordinary circumstances. And at those times, right, we are to love God in everything with all of our strength, with our physical bodies and the abundance of our lives when we're giving our all for him. And so, friends, we're to love God with all that we are on the inside, all that we have and all that we do in our regular day-to-day living, and in the out-of-the-norm experiences of our lives. In other words, love God with all that you are, all that you have, all the time, no matter the situation. Love God with everything. And that's the same thing that the New Testament passages are saying as well. In Matthew, who is a Jew writing to Jews, there was still the Hebrew understanding of people being threefold beings, but Greek philosophy's emphasis on the mind had begun to change the way that Jews thought about humanity. That's why instead of saying that we are to love God with all of our heart, soul, and strength, right, Matthew says that in the book of Matthew, Jesus says that we are to love God with our heart, soul, and mind when Jesus gave the great commandment to love God with all of our being. Mark and Luke include 4 aspects of a person, which is also quite common in Greek thinking, where people are believed to have a spirit or soul, something that lasts beyond this life, a mind that is capable of thinking, a heart that feels emotions, which together with the mind comprises the will and the way that we make choices, and a body which acts out those decisions. And so while there are different iterations of the great commandment to love God with all that we are, they're all saying the same thing, right? Just to different people in different cultures and at different times. And so ultimately it comes down, friends, to the orientation of our hearts. It comes down to the orientation of our hearts and loving God. But friends, that's the rub, isn't it? Right? That's the offense of the gospel. That there is a God who can tell us the right way that we should live. Right? Because God has commanded things we don't like how the only right sexual orientation is monogamous heterosexuality, people often take offense to this. But friends, loving God by being in a relationship with Jesus and by following him with our lives is also how we are able to tap into God's strength and to unbend the compass arrows of our lives and overpower our bad thinking, our sinful emotions and desires, and our wrong choices. It's through loving God. And so before we wrap up, we've been talking about love and loving God for a while here, but let me just put it out to you. What is love? Don't worry, I'm not going to sing the song, but what is love, right? We just talked about loving God with all that we are, but what does that mean to you? What is love in the way that you think about it and understand it? Take a few minutes, share your thoughts with those sitting around you, and then we'll come back together and wrap up. right. I'm glad there's been some laughing and chuckling over this discussion of what love is. The table I was at, they were all shaking their heads at me, and so I had to say the lyrics of the song, but that's okay. But friends, love is not just, a feeling, right? It's not just the warm fuzzies that you get when somebody cares about you or the attraction that you might feel towards someone. Yes, it absolutely does and can include your feelings, but it also includes your thoughts, your choices, and your actions. It includes how you value and prioritize someone in your life. And that means that we can actually focus our thoughts on who we love, right? That means that we can actually choose who we love, right? We can actually choose how we love them and to what extent that we love them. You see, that actually flies in the face of our culture today, right? It's a lot of people believe that you just kind of fall into love and you fall out of love, right? It's something that happens to you. It's not something that you choose. But friends, you can actually choose where you place your affections and to the extent that you love other people, right? Either more or less than other people and other things. For example, when we're talking about, loving people to different degrees, the Bible speaks of how a husband and a wife, when they are married and are joined together, they become one flesh, where they're to love each other as an extension of themselves. And while children are a wonderful blessing, parents shouldn't love their children more than each other. Right? Sociologists who study our culture and society today back this up. They back up the Bible through their studies of our lives today, where they've seen that parents who love their children more than each other often end up estranged from each other, especially when those kids grow up and move out. Right? And sadly, those marriages often end in divorce. Whereas parents who prioritize and love each other more than their kids, while they might sometimes get a little bit of pushback from their children, the reality is that ultimately children feel safer and feel more loved knowing that their parents love each other and will always stay together. And so we actually need to learn to not only love God and love others, but we need to learn to love others in the right priority and to the right extent. And so, friends, when it comes to choosing who to love and who to love the most, it should be Jesus, right? Jesus should be your greatest love, and your affections for him should outweigh your love for anyone and everything else, right? You should love Jesus with every thought, and you can do that by making every thought obedient to Jesus. The Apostle Paul wrote in 2 Corinthians 10:5, we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. In other words, we need to compare every thought to what Jesus said and did. And friends, if any of our thoughts don't line up with that, then we need to get rid of that thought and replace it with the truth of Jesus found in his word. That's loving Jesus with all of your mind, right? You should also love Jesus with a fiery passion and with all of your emotions. Paul also wrote in Romans 12:11, never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Those words zeal and fervor are words of passion and desire, and your greatest desire should be for Jesus. Right? That's loving Jesus with all of your heart. You should also love Jesus with every choice that you make. In John 14, verse 15, Jesus said, if you love me, keep my commands. Right? If you love me, keep my commands. Friends, that's a choice of the will. And if you're not sure what to do, if you're not sure what Jesus is commanding you to do, how you should live your life, pray. Read your Bible, right? Seek God's will for you, which might include seeking out the godly wisdom and advice of other believers. But friends, when you do know his will, do it. Do it, right? It's the choice that we can make. Right? Loving Jesus with every choice should obviously affect our speech and our actions, which is, again, that's loving Jesus with all of our strength. Friends, when you love Jesus in this way and to this extent, right, with everything, with all of your life and everything that you have, everything that you do, your love and affection for him and the love he has for you will help you to realign the orientation of your heart and your life towards him. As we put this into practice, this is how we reorient our hearts. This is how we change our emotions and our feelings. This is how we change the way that we live our lives, by setting our affections on Christ. See, friends, if you have that kind of passion and love for Jesus, then you will be able to overcome any other desire or attraction with the affection that you have for him. Or when your love for Jesus far outweighs your love for pornography, your desire for sex outside of marriage, even your attraction and sexual desire for the same gender, then you will have the strength in Christ to overcome all desires contrary to his design for sex and marriage. And you'll be able to choose to either embrace his gift of sex within a heterosexual marriage, or you can embrace his gift of celibacy, where either way, your love for Jesus is over and above your love for anyone or anything else, including yourself. Of course, you might be wondering, well, why should we love Jesus in this way and to this extent? And the answer is simple. Because that's how Jesus has loved us. That's right. That's how Jesus has loved us. In the New Testament, the Greek word for the love that Jesus has for us is the word agape. And it's a love of goodwill, of benevolence, and of delight. That's right. Jesus delights in you. Right? Jesus delights in us simply because of who we are and because he has made us. But friends, agape love is also a willful love. It's a choosing type of love where Jesus values us so much that he chose to love us despite our sin. He chose to love us despite the fact that we've all turned our backs on him. We've all lived in rebellion to him. And he lived out that choice to love us by physically dying on the cross for you and for me. And so agape is a self-sacrificing love where Jesus gave his all to save us from death and to give us life so that we could be forever with him, so that we could be in a perfect relationship with him for the rest of eternity. Friends, Jesus loves us that much. And if he can love us that much and to that extent, then we should be able to choose to make some sacrifices of our own and embrace sex on his terms, not based on our own desires, not based on our own attractions, but based on how he designed sex and marriage that reveals just a hint of the closeness that we can have with him. So friends, let me close with a few questions for you. What is the bent of your heart? How is your heart? What is the orientation of your heart, and how is it curved in towards yourself? And how are your affections geared towards you rather than Jesus? And as you're thinking about those areas in your life that probably need to change and adapt a bit, let me ask you, what do you need to do to straighten the orientation of your heart? What do you need to straighten that heart compass arrow so that it's focused foremost on Jesus, where your affections for him surpass your affections for everything else, so that you'll live for him, his way, especially in the area of how you think, talk about, and live out your sexual orientation? Friends, the desire of Jesus is that we have a Jesus orientation. Right? That our hearts are oriented towards him, and that relationship with him and that our love for him supersedes all other attractions, desires, and loves in our lives, because that is what he has done for us. And that's how much he loves you and how much he loves me. Would you pray with me? Father, you are such an incredible God. And Lord, when we think about and reflect on your love, it's hard for us not to become overwhelmed with the incredible display of love that you've shown to us by sending your son Jesus to die on the cross for us. And yet, Lord, I'm always amazed how in my own heart it is so easy for me, even in spite of knowing your incredible love, it's so amazing how easy it is to still want to live my life my way. To still wrestle with sin and with desires and attractions towards things that I know are wrong. And Lord, that's because myself and all of us here don't take seriously that command to love you with all our heart, all our soul, all our mind, all our strength, all of our everything. And so, Lord, grow our love for you. Help our affections for you to overpower any want, any desire, anything that is contrary to what you want for us. Lord, help us to lean into you, to rely on your strength, to rely on your love, to give us victory over sin. And we can only do that because of you and what you've done for us. And so we thank you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.